In the small village of Isale, tucked between red hills and tall grass in southwestern Nigeria, that man was Adewale. He was 38 years old. He lived alone in a two-room house made of mud and old cement. He woke before sunrise every morning. He farmed. He came home. He slept. And then he did it all again the next day. Nobody thought much of him. He was not loud. He did not drink at the local bar with the other men on Friday evenings. He did not argue about football. He did not chase women or spend money on things that would impress people. He simply worked. Day after day, season after season, harvest after harvest. His farm was his whole life. 3 acres of yams, 2 of maize, and 1 small plot at the edge of the property where he grew flowers. This last part confused everyone. Flowers did not earn money. Flowers did not feed a family. Yet Adewale watered them every single morning before he touched anything else on the farm. When his neighbor, an older woman named Mama Cecilia, asked him why he bothered with the flowers, he only smiled and said his mother had asked him to plant them there. He had done it since he was a boy, and he saw no reason to stop. The village had a name for him. They called him Wale the Quiet. It was not meant as a compliment. In Isale, quiet men were seen as weak men. The men who earned respect were the ones with big voices and bigger trucks, the ones who threw parties and paid for everyone's food and let you know about it afterward. Adewale was none of those things. He was thin, dark-skinned, with hands that were rough from the soil, and eyes that stayed calm even when the world around him was not. Children liked him, though. They did not know why, and if you asked them, they could not explain it. They just knew that when Adewale passed by on his way to the farm, something about him made them feel safe. Dogs that barked at strangers did not bark at him. Elders who rarely greeted anyone younger stopped to nod at him as he walked past. It was as if the village felt something about him that the village could not name. His mother had died 7 years earlier. Her name was Aya Risi, and she had been the most important person in his life. She raised him alone. His father had died when Adewale was only 9 years old, a sudden illness that took him in less than a week. After that, it was just the two of them, a small farm, and a set of rules his mother kept that nobody else in the village seemed to follow. She never missed the morning flower watering. She spoke to him in a language that was older than the one everyone else used, a dialect so deep that even Adewale had to think carefully to follow it. She told him stories at night before he slept, stories about great kings and long journeys, and people who were tested by the earth before they were given their crowns. He thought they were just stories. He thought all mothers told their children stories like that. He was wrong. 3 days before she died, she held his hands in hers and looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said something he never forgot. She said, "The land already knows who you are. When the time comes, do not be afraid. Just be still. You have always known how to be still." He thought she was speaking about the farm. He thought she meant that the land knew him as a farmer, that his patience with the soil had been seen and rewarded. He held her hands and told her not to worry. She closed her eyes and smiled, and she was gone 3 mornings later. The land already knows who you are. When the time comes, do not be afraid, just be still. November came with dry air and the smell of harmattan dust. Adewale was in the field at 7 in the morning, pulling weeds from around the base of his yam mounds, when he heard a car engine, an unusual sound on a dirt road that barely saw motorcycles. He looked up and saw a black SUV moving slowly toward the village center, its windows dark, and its tires kicking up red dust. He watched it for a moment, then went back to his weeding. It had nothing to do with him. By midday, the whole village knew the car had come from Il-Aif, the ancient city, the city of kings. 2 men in fine embroidered agbada had stepped out of it and asked, very specifically, for a man named Adewale. They used all 3 names. Most people in Asale did not even know Adewale had a middle name. His full surname, Ogundimu, was known, but nobody had said it in a long time. He was just Wale the Quiet. The 2 men waited in the shade of the village chief's veranda. They were offered water and palm wine. They took the water. People passed by the compound again and again, pretending to have business there, trying to get a look at the men who had come from Ilife, asking for the yam farmer. It was almost 4 in the afternoon when Adewale came back from the field. His boots were red with soil. His shirt was damp with the work of the day. He saw the SUV outside the chief's compound and he stopped walking. He did not look surprised. He stood still for a moment, his eyes calm, and then he walked to the outdoor tap at the side of his house, washed his hands and face, dried himself with the cloth at his waist, and walked over. One of the men from Ile stood up when he saw him coming. He said, "We have been looking for you for 4 years." Adewale looked at him and said, "I have been here the whole time." What the men told him that evening took 2 hours to explain and a lifetime to understand. 40 years before Adewale was born, his grandfather, a man named Oba Ogundimu II, had been the reigning traditional king of a lineage that stretched back 3 centuries. The Ogundimu royal family had held a position of great spiritual and community authority in their region of Yorubaland. They were not a political party or a government office. They were something older and deeper than that. A family whose role was to hold the community together, to settle disputes, to speak for the ancestors, and to make sure the people did not lose their way. In 1979, a conflict tore through the region. A rival group, hungry for the land and the title, forced the royal family out. A fire destroyed the palace records. The official history was rewritten to say that the Ogundimu bloodline had ended. Most people believed it. Time passed. New families rose. The world moved on. But one man did not accept it. Before the conflict reached its worst point, Oba Ogundimu II quietly moved his youngest son, Adewale's father, to a small village in the hills. He changed the family name in the local records. He told his son to be humble, to stay low, to farm the land, and to wait. He told him the time would come when the truth would not be able to stay buried any longer. Adewale's father grew up. He married, he had a son, and then he died young, before he could pass the full story on. The burden fell to Oyarisi, Adewale's mother, a woman who had been told everything by her husband before he passed. She carried that secret alone for 30 years. She told no one. She only planted flowers. She only told stories at night. She only whispered things to her son that he would not understand until the world came knocking. The 2 men from Ile explained that a historian working on a separate project had found fire-damaged archive documents in the city of Ibadan, documents that had survived the 1979 conflict in a government box that was never opened again. Those documents carried names, dates, lineage records. The truth had survived the fire after all. In a box on a shelf, quietly waiting just like the man it described. The truth had survived the fire after all. In a box on a shelf, quietly waiting, just like the man it described. Adewale did not sleep that night. He sat on the steps outside his house and looked at the sky for a long time. The village was quiet. A dog barked somewhere far away. A breeze moved through the tall grass at the edge of his compound. Then he got up and walked to the flower plot. He crouched down and looked at the plants in the dark. His lantern threw a warm, trembling light over them. And for the first time in his life, he recognized what they were. He had seen this type of flower before, in a photograph in an old book someone had once shown him during a school trip years ago. The book was about Yoruba royal customs. The flower was called Ewe Oba. In the old traditions, it was planted only near royal grounds. It was the flower of kings. His mother had made him plant the flower of kings outside their mud brick house every year of his life. She had never said why. She had never used those words. She had just handed him the seeds every planting season and said, "This one first." Adewale pressed his palm flat against the soil. He could feel the warmth of the earth even in the cool of the night. He thought about his mother's hands. He thought about his grandfather, a man he had never met, a king who gave up his throne to save his bloodline. He thought about his father dying young with a secret in his chest. He thought about every morning he had watered these flowers without knowing what he was doing. How he had been tending to something sacred without being told it was sacred. He stayed there until the first light came. Then he stood up, washed his face, and began to get ready for the journey to Ile. He had no family member with him. He had no notes or prepared speech. They asked him about his grandfather's name. He told them, They asked about his father's village of origin. He told them. They asked him to recite certain oral history passages that only members of the true Ogundemu lineage would know, things that were never written down and never taught in any school. They were the kind of things a mother tells her child at night, in the old deep dialect, through stories that sound like fairy tales but are actually records. Adewale answered every question, slowly, clearly, without hesitation. He answered in the same old dialect his mother had spoken to him in. Some of the chiefs leaned forward in their seats. One of them reached for his water and held it without drinking, just held it, listening. On the second day, a man named Chief Fasanya stood up and challenged everything. He was a wealthy businessman from the city who had been quietly claiming ties to the same royal lineage for years. He had lawyers, documents, and a polished presentation prepared on a laptop. He spoke for 2 hours about why Adewale's claim was impossible, why the archived documents were unreliable, and why a man who farmed yams in a village had no place in any royal conversation. Adewale listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not look angry. When Chief Fasanya finished, the lead council elder turned to Adewale and asked if he had a response. Adewale looked at Chief Fasanya for a moment. Then he asked one question. It was a quiet question, asked in a voice that barely filled the room, but it was a question that went directly to the center of Fasanya's entire argument. A detail about a specific date in the succession records that Fasanya had stated incorrectly. The correct date was something only someone who truly knew the history from the inside would know. Chief Fasanya had no answer. The room was very quiet after that. On the morning of the third day, an old woman was brought into the hearing room in a wooden chair, carried by 2 young men. Her name was Mama Aduni. She was 91 years old. She had worked in the original Ogundemu Palace as a young girl, before the conflict of 1979. She had been found by the council's researchers living in a small house at the edge of Ile-Ife, still sharp, still watching the world from behind, eyes that had seen a century of it. She was the last living person who had known the royal household before it was destroyed. The room was silent as she was brought in. Even Chief Fasanya sat without moving. Mama Aduni looked around the room slowly. Then her eyes settled on Adewale. She looked at him for a long time. Her face did not change. Then she spoke to him in the old dialect, the very deep one, the one that most people in the room did not follow. It was one sentence, a question. Adewale answered in the same dialect without pausing. Mama Aduni closed her eyes. Everyone in the room waited. When she opened them again, she spoke clearly, in standard Yoruba, so that everyone could understand. She said, "This is the one." His grandfather had that same stillness, like a river that does not rush, because it already knows where it is going. Nobody argued after that. Done. The council issued its decision on a Wednesday afternoon in December. The document was long, but its meaning was simple. Adewale Olukayode Ogundemu was the rightful heir of the Ogundemu royal lineage. His coronation was set for February. The news moved fast. A journalist who had come to write a mocking story about a yam farmer who thought he was a king wrote something completely different instead. The article described a man who had spent his whole life on a farm, not hiding from greatness, but simply not knowing he was carrying it. It was read by people in 30 countries within a week. The line that stayed with everyone was simple. He did not chase the throne. The throne followed the dirt road to his farm and knocked on his door. Chief Fasanya filed legal papers to block the coronation. They were denied. He filed again. Denied again. He gave interviews to television stations saying the whole thing was a mistake. Nobody was convinced. The public had already made up their minds, not because of documents or legal arguments, but because of the way Adewale had handled everything. He had not insulted Chief Fasanya in public. He had not celebrated loudly when the decision was announced. He had not given long interviews about himself. When a reporter asked him how it felt to know he was about to become a king, he thought for a moment and then said, "I feel the same as I always feel. Grateful for the morning, grateful for the soil." Nin! Before the coronation, Adewale asked the council for 2 weeks at home. They agreed, though they did not fully understand the request. He went back to Isalioke. He put on his old boots. He went to the farm. He did not go back to prove a point. He did not go back to say goodbye. He went back because the farm was where he had always done his thinking, and he had a great deal to think about. Every morning he watered the flowers first. Every evening he sat on the steps of his house and looked at the sky. His neighbors were different with him now. Some were warm, some were nervous, and a few stayed away completely, because they did not know how to speak to a man who had turned out to be something they had not expected. He understood. He did not ask anyone to be comfortable with it before they were ready. On the last evening before he left, he sat next to the flower plot after dark and spoke quietly to his mother. He told her he had found what she had planted. He told her he understood now. The stories, the dialect, the flowers, the long mornings of teaching him patience through silence. He told her that she had done everything she could with what she had been given, and that it was enough. More than enough. He pressed his hand into the earth one more time. The soil was warm. It was always warm, even at night. He had never really thought about why before. Now he thought perhaps it was because some ground holds on to the heat longer than others. The ground that has been tended with love, worked with care, trusted season after season.
Done!
The coronation took place on a Saturday morning in February. 2,000 people came. The road to the ceremony grounds was lined with people who had traveled from neighboring towns and states. Some had read the article. Some had seen the television coverage. Some had simply heard the story passing from mouth to mouth, the way important stories always travel. From someone who knew someone who was there. Adewale walked to the ceremony grounds on foot, not because there was no car available, but because he chose to walk. He wore ceremonial robes of deep blue and gold, but his posture was the same as always. Calm, steady, unhurried. People watched him pass, and many of them felt the same thing that the children of Adewale had always felt, without being able to explain it. Something settled in them when he went by. Something that had been anxious became still. The drumming began the moment he entered the grounds. 7 different drums played together, their rhythms woven into one sound that rose up into the open sky and seemed to have no end. People in the crowd who had never met Adewale found themselves moved in ways they could not explain afterward. One elderly man said he felt as if he had been waiting for that morning his whole life without knowing it. The ceremony lasted 6 hours. At every moment, Adewale was present. He responded to every ritual with the kind of knowledge that only comes from a lifetime of preparation. A preparation he had not even known he was receiving. When the crown was placed on his head, he bowed low to receive it. He stayed bowed. The drumming softened. The crowd went quiet. He stayed bowed for what felt like a long time, his forehead nearly touching the earth he had worked his whole life. Some people thought he was overcome with emotion. The council elder beside him later said it was something else. He said Adewale looked, in that bowed position, exactly like a farmer checking on a seedling in the ground. Careful, gentle, completely at home. Then he straightened. He looked out at the crowd. He did not smile right away. He just looked, the way a man looks at something he recognizes after a long time away from it. Then, slowly, he smiled.
Ugh! He kept the farm. This was the thing people talked about long after everything else had settled. A king with a crown and a royal title and responsibilities that would fill any ordinary man's every hour. And he kept his farm. Twice a week, before the day's business began, he was in the field before the sun was fully up.
The people of Adewale would see his lantern moving in the dark on those mornings. The same lantern, the same boots, the same steady walk between the rows. In his first year, he started a seed-sharing program that helped 63 farming families across 3 local government areas. He did not call it a royal initiative. He called it a farmer helping other farmers. He showed up to meetings about it in person, sat on the ground with the other farmers, ate from the same bowl, and listened more than he spoke. When people asked him how he had stayed so calm through everything, the hearings, the opposition, the attention, the sudden change in his life, he gave different answers at different times. But the answer he gave most often was the simplest one. He said the farm had taught him. He said that when you spend enough years putting something into the ground and waiting for it to come back, you stop being afraid of time. You stop needing everything to happen quickly. You learn to trust the process, even when you cannot see what is happening beneath the surface. He said his mother had taught him the same lesson in a different way. She could not give him a crown. She could not give him a palace or a title or a history lesson. But she could give him a garden to tend. She could give him stories to hold. She could give him a quiet that was strong enough to last until the world was ready to hear it. She could not give him a crown. but she gave him something that would make him ready for one. Patience, soil, and a garden full of a king's flowers. Years passed. The name Adewale Olukayode Ogundimu became known far beyond Isale Oke, far beyond the hills of southwestern Nigeria. People wrote about him, studied him, told his story to their children the way stories of great men are told, not to impress, but to remind. To remind people that greatness does not always arrive with noise, that the most powerful thing in a room is sometimes the most quiet, that a crown worn by the right person does not need to announce itself, and that sometimes, all the ground needs to produce something extraordinary is one person willing to tend it every morning, without knowing exactly why, trusting that the reason will eventually show itself. In Isale Oke, long after everything changed, one thing remained exactly the same. Every morning before sunrise, a lantern moved through the rows of a small farm at the edge of the village, and every morning, before anything else was touched, the flowers were watered first.